أضيق الأرض من غير ذاك المكان، ما أضيق الأرض من غير ذاك المكان، وما أوسع القبر من تحت منار تبغي الجدود، ما أضيق الأرض من غير ذاك المكان، وما أوسع القبر من تحت منابض تبغي الجدود. سكبنا على الجرح وردا، سكبنا على الجرح وردا، سكبنا على الجرح وردا، وسرنا إلى خيمة الصلح، سرنا وسرنا إلى خيمة الصلح، سرنا نصلا يقبل ثغر الوريد، وسرنا إلى خيمة الصلح، سرنا وسرنا إلى خيمة الصلح، سرنا نصلا يقبل ثغر الوريد، وقبل التفاوض ردوا إلى قبرها جثتي، فقد ملت العين، فقد ملت العين وانترى قبرها من بعيد. خذوني خذوني Hello and Masa al Khair if you are watching us from Palestine, and Sabah al Khair if you are in the US, and Ahlan wa Sahlan if you are watching us from anywhere around the world, and Ramadan Kareem. My name is Hanna Eidi. I am with Dunya Productions. We're based here in Seattle. We are a group of very talented theater artists and activists locally here in Seattle. This program is about Palestine. It's about the West Bank. It's about Gaza. And these are letters that we're going to be reading for you that we have received from friends and families and collected from Palestine, which is the least we could do here at Dunya, to give voice to our people who are living under occupation in Palestine. We hope that by the end of this pandemic, people around the world will pay a little bit more attention to the ongoing 72 years old of injustice and humanitarian crisis in Palestine. This program is about 20 minutes of reading these letters, performance by artists and talented people here at Dunya. And we also have a special guest with us, Ramzi Baroud, who will be updating us on the situation in Palestine, and also answering questions and any comments that you will be making by basically pressing the chat button on the bottom of your screen. It's a chat function, and we will be turning this on after the performance. And with that, Dunya Productions presents I Give You Letters from Palestine in the Time of the Virus.
Bethlehem is like a ghost town. People are staying indoors. At the Natural History Museum, we met with health officials. We took precautions as needed, but work must go on. Animals have to be fed at the museum garden: chickens, peacocks, rabbits, hamsters, hawk, fish. So we come every day. Many staff and volunteers work from home. Some of our activities are on hold and money is tight.
For most of the people of Bethlehem, this lockdown is hardly their first. Lockdowns and curfews were the status quo in the city during the long years of the Second Intifada. Whether our Israeli neighbors know or care, we have been through some of this before. We have worked from home, we did homeschooling, our sports leagues were frozen, we could not travel, and we were afraid of leaving our houses. Today, I could write a whole book on how we help each other. Not just medical personnel, but police, shop owners, owners of restaurants, and many others who work silently. People donate food, medicines, money, and so forth to help those in quarantine or families of those infected.
As of last night, our town of Beit Sahur is under complete curfew. Even shopping for food is prohibited. The emergency committee stated that we can call shops for home delivery. I'm not sure how that would work out since most people need money, which they do not have. And if they do have, it is in the bank, and they would need to go to ATMs, which are prohibited. And the banks are closed in the Bethlehem district, so they cannot restock the ATM machines. I also would like to check on needy people and help them, but I have to figure out how we can do that under complete curfew. Staff are all at home and we try to do work, though psychologically it is challenging, but we must keep our spirits up.
Israel is taking this opportunity to continue its ethnic cleansing and apartheid. Their occupation army even came into Bethlehem dressed in full protective corona gear and arrested 3 people from their homes.
The virus is official in Gaza, where our hospitals are already short on vital medicine and equipment, and people are crowded in like sardines. We've been banned from traveling for 14 years. Cleanliness is difficult when water supplies are contaminated and garbage collection doesn't exist.
I have lived all of my 22 years in the tiny besieged Gaza Strip. I have never been allowed to leave. This is the only place I've ever known. I grew up with war, occupation, oppression, and conflict. How could this be worse? But when my 73-year-old uncle refused to shake my hand during a visit, I began to think, this might be a different kind of threat.
It was almost 1 a.m. when I read the news that Gaza had identified its first 2 coronavirus victims. My heart beat rapidly and fear flushed like ice water through my body. I continued to read, but my eyes teared up and everything looked blurred, like a gauzy curtain had suddenly dropped down. I attempted to blink the tears out of my eyes and continue reading. Those 2 people had returned to Gaza from Pakistan. And although all travelers have immediately been quarantined, no one here trusts that this has kept the infection contained.
I was riding in a taxi and the driver remarked on how much his passenger load had already declined with just the fear of the virus hanging over the strip. He was almost in tears when he told me that he had kids, and if he doesn't work every day, he won't be able to feed them.
My father works as a fabric seller and deals with people all day. His shop is our family's main source of income, and each day makes a difference.
What if we stay home and get infected by the tap water? If the virus enters Gaza, it will be like throwing a gas canister inside a closed room. Everyone inside will breathe it. Infection does not necessarily mean death everywhere, but in Gaza it could be. If one of my kids got infected and no one could help them, only because we are under siege in Gaza, I will lose faith in everything.
There are many people who are homeless. Some families are living in a room which they made with some tools which is not safe for saving you from the coronavirus. Those people don't have their basic needs met, and they are living beside tons of garbage mountains.
For a while, there was talk on social media about the benefits of the siege, which I found sort of shocking. Yes, the blockade helped prevent COVID-19 from invading Gaza for days and weeks, but realistically, it was just a matter of time. And this blockade is the reason hundreds and maybe thousands of people here have died because they couldn't get access to proper medical treatment. My own mother has suffered severe pain from trigeminal neuralgia, and while treatments are available elsewhere that could bring her relief, she has no access here. She has told me so many times she'd just rather die.
The blockade also is the reason hundreds of Palestinian youths have lost arms and legs in the Great Return March, punished by snipers for protesting their imprisonment. It is the reason why hundreds of extraordinary students lost opportunities to study at foreign colleges and universities because they could not travel. It is the reason why talented Palestinian athletes and artists cannot participate in international workshops and competitions. And it is the reason why our economy is so sick and our unemployment rate is the highest in the world, 70% among young people.
The Israeli blockade of Gaza may have protected it temporarily, but now it will prevent us from caring properly for our people. More people will get infected, and Gaza will become the world's latest hotspot for coronavirus cases and deaths. And once the world finally gets a vaccine for the virus, Gaza will be the last to get it.
When you see pictures of cities with their famous streets empty, remember the Palestinian refugee camps in Gaza and think about what they call their fertile alleyways. I was raised in one of those refugee camps in Rafah called Block J. Nothing in my language can quite describe what the word camp means to me. On one hand, it's the home where I grew up, the place I associate with my friends and neighbors, and the site of the lone fig tree planted by my beloved grandfather, may he rest in peace. But on the other, there is a lack of sunshine due to the closeness of the dull gray concrete walls, the mud in the unpaved alleyways in between because leaking sewage pipes hang overhead, and people peddling everything from Twinkies to tissue in those very same streets, despite the crowding, because that is the only way they can eke out a living. Imagine telling them they must maintain 6 feet between them if COVID-19 invades. How would they even do that when their homes are so close together with an average of 7 people in one 1,500 square foot space? Where will people be isolated? In homes where 7 people share a small room, without ventilation, without a sink or toilet? And imagine what those other countries would do if they had to manage through this crisis while being controlled by an occupying power. In our case, Israel.
In some ways, the coronavirus is like the Israeli army. They both attack innocent people. They both randomly and unexpectedly hit areas heavily populated by civilians. They both scare people and steal their lives. Which is worse?
For me, living through an Israeli escalation is much worse. It's more lethal. The Israeli army targets people of all ages and health. buildings, animals, plants. Yet the response of the world to the two crises differs dramatically. To the virus, a full-out global mobilization. To Israel's attacks on Gaza, almost no response at all. In Gaza, staying at home isn't enough to protect you. Israeli missiles can just as easily find you there.
In Gaza, the first 23 years of my life were lived in virtual lockdown. My father's quarantine was experienced much earlier, as did his father's shelter in place before him. They both died and were buried in Gaza's cemeteries without ever experiencing true freedom outside of their refugee camp in Gaza. As a child, I learned to listen intently to orders barked out by Israeli military officers as they swept through our refugee camp in Gaza, declaring or easing military curfews. Every day, 10 or 15 minutes after the nightly curfew set in, we would hear crackling and hissing of bullets as they whistled through the air from various distances. Automatically, we would conclude that someone, a worker, a teacher, or a rowdy teenager, missed his chance by a few minutes and paid the price for it.
Now that nearly half of the population of planet Earth are experiencing some form of curfew or other, we have a few suggestions on how to survive the prolonged confinement the Palestinian way.
Always think ahead and prepare for a longer lockdown than the initial one declared by your city or state. Whenever the Israeli army killed one or more refugees, we knew in advance that mass protests would follow, thus more killings. In these situations, a curfew was imminent. Number one priority was to ensure that all family members congregated at home or stayed within close proximity so that they could rush in as fast as possible when the caravan of Israeli military jeeps and tanks came thundering, opening fire at anyone or anything within sight.
Stay calm. Take control of the situation. Do not panic. And assign specific responsibilities to every family member. This strengthens the family unit and sets the stage for collective solidarity, desperately required under these circumstances. Typically, my mother would come in, rational and calculating. She would storm the kitchen and assess what basic supplies were missing, starting with the flour, sugar, and olive oil. Knowing that the first crackdown by the Israelis would be on water supplies and electricity, she would fill several plastic containers of water, designating some for tea, coffee, and cooking, and others for dishes and washing clothes. Per her orders, we would rush to nearby stores to make small but necessary purchases, batteries for the flashlight and the transistor radio, cigarettes for my dad, and a few VHS videotapes, which we would watch over and over again, whether the curfew lasted for a few days or a few weeks.
Preserve your water. It is easy to feel invincible and fully prepared on the first day of quarantine or military curfew. Many times we live to regret that false sense of readiness as we drank too much tea or squandered our dishwashing water supplies too quickly. Cautiously use your water supplies during quarantine and never under any circumstances drink rainwater, or at least keep diarrhea pills handy.
Ration your food. Agree in advance on what classifies as essential food and consume your food in a rational way. Also, if you are lucky enough to locate Dutch candy in whatever version of the Abu Saddad store in your town, do not gamble it away in stupid games with your brothers all in one day.
Have more than one form of entertainment and be prepared for every eventuality, including at power outages as a form of collective punishment. If electricity is cut off, be ready with alternative options: books, free wrestling, living room soccer, with the ball preferably made from stuffed up socks contributed by all family members, and of course, candy poker.
Find the humor in grim situations. Be funny, don't take life too seriously, share a laugh with others, and let humor inject hope in every hour and every day of your quarantine.
Gaza is locked up so tight, even a virus can't get in.
Gaza is so poor, even a virus would run away scared.
During curfew is when you need your sense of humor most. Take things lightly. Laugh at your miserable situation if you must. Forgive yourself for not being perfect, for panicking when you should have been composed, or for forcing your younger brother to gamble his underwear when he runs out of Dutch candy.
Let your values guide you during your hours of loneliness. In curfews, we developed a different relationship with God. God became a personal and more intimate companion as we often prayed in total darkness, whispered our verses so very cautiously as not to be heard by pesky soldiers. And even those who hardly prayed before the curfew kept up with all 5 prayers during the lockdown.
What we do have in Gaza is a strong social fabric that holds us together. Our families, our faith, rituals, and traditions. This season, it feels like the generosity of Ramadan is magnified. Despite the risks, youth groups are redoubling their efforts to help families hardest hit. One group contributed their own money and distributed 100 food parcels during the first days of Ramadan.
I stand at the balcony singing, "We are here. We are here for all of us. That's why we're here." I close my eyes and imagine a friend at the balcony in the city of Milan. Our souls are brought together so we can love each other. Brother. I see my friends Pam and Kevin in the USA at their balconies. Ignore what Trump says. Sing, "We are here. We are here for all of us." My friends from Switzerland and Germany, Basel and Frankfurt are singing. Let's talk about our part. My heart touching your heart. Let's talk about living. I've had enough of dying. That's not what we are all about.
According to the World Health Organization, 97% of all Gaza's water is not fit for human consumption. Even when it is available, doctors and nurses are unable to sterilize their hands because of the water quality.
There are only 62 ventilation devices across Gaza, more than 2/3 of which are already used by other patients.
There are only 2 test kits, enough to examine 190 people.
It was 5 years ago that the United Nations predicted Gaza would be uninhabitable by 2020.
The truth is, no amount of preparedness in Gaza, or frankly anywhere in occupied Palestine, can stop the spread of the coronavirus. What is needed is a fundamental and structural change that would emancipate the Palestinian healthcare system from the impact of the Israeli occupation and the Israeli government's policies, of perpetual siege and politically imposed quarantines, also known as apartheid.
Looking around us, Gazans see people all over the world experiencing what we live every day: mandatory isolation, unemployment, poverty, rampant illness, and death. We take no joy in that. Only hope that once the coronavirus passes and life around the world returns to normal, that people will remember Gaza, still occupied, still isolated, but perhaps no longer forgotten.
I hope that under no circumstances you will ever hear these ominous words, "You are now under curfew. Anyone who violates orders will be shot immediately." I also hope that this COVID-19 quarantine will make us kinder to each other and will make us emerge from our homes better people, ready to take on global challenges while united in our common faith, collective pain, and a renewed sense of love for our environment. And when it's all over, think of Palestine. For her people have been quarantined for 71 years and counting.
I would like to mention, just to give a credit to the poet who sent me the poem that I sang in the beginning, Palestinian poet Hussein Muhanna from Palestine. So thank you, actors and readers. We wanted to move on to the discussion and get an update from Palestine. And at this time, if you want to act on your concern for the Palestinian people in the time of the virus, we would like you to go to the website. We've set up a donation site for direct relief to families in Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank. We're working with Salam Cultural Museum and Donkey Saddle Projects to get funding to some organizers that we know. These are people that we trust to distribute packages of food and necessities to families in need, including families of those in quarantine in Gaza during the pandemic. So if you care to donate, 100% of the fund donated to this small scale volunteer project will directly go towards these vital provisions. I also wanted to thank these people who already donated even before we got on the air. We appreciate it. And we also, we basically thanking you for, on behalf of the people of Palestine. So now it's time to get an update from Palestine. If you look at the bottom middle of your Zoom screen, you have a chat button. We've turned it on. We will turn it on after the update from Palestine. But you can ask questions and you make comments. Your questions and comments will just go to us. We can see that, and as you type it. So we would like, I guess your questions would be to our guest, who is Ramzi Baroud. Ramzi Baroud is also one of the contributors to the letters that we read. Ramzi Baroud is a journalist and an editor of the Palestine Chronicle. He's the author of 5 books. His latest is These Chains Will Be Broken, Palestinian Stories of Struggle and Defiance in Israeli Prisons. Dr. Baroud is a non-resident senior research fellow at the Center for Islam and Global Affairs, Istanbul Ziam University. You can also get to his website, ramzibaroud.net, to learn more about him. So at this time, I would like to welcome Ramzi. Ahlan, Ramzi, can you please maybe just start briefly with an update about the situation in Palestine as you know it from friends and family that you have?
Right. Thank you very much, Hanna. First of all, for that impressive performance. I was going to ask you about who is the poet, and now you told us. So thank you for that, and also for all the artists and the readers and the beautiful contributions and the way that they have been arranged very beautifully by Ed. really very touching. I think you know, just hearing all of these beautiful contributions, I feel like we are caught in this same old paradigm of the, you know, as Antonio Gramsci put it once, as the pessimism of the intellect, the optimism of the will. You know, this idea that no matter how bad things can possibly get, under no circumstance are we planning to give up or give in. And there is always a reason to hope, and there is always a reason to wake up in the morning, and there is always a reason to move forward. And I think, you know, we're talking about donating and all of that, and I think it is so very important for people to kind of be part of this project by making a contribution, by showing an act of solidarity. What you are essentially doing is that you are telling the people in Gaza, the people throughout Palestine, you are not on your own. We are all one family, and we are all going to be part of this. We are going to get through this together. That's the message. So this is not about money and charity per se. It's about solidarity. It's absolutely essential at this time. Of course, the situation in Palestine you know, is this constant state of arrested development. Sometimes you feel like things are moving forward, but at the end of the day, you look back and you realize that very little has changed. We know that there is a national government now in Israel that is a national unity government, and it's bringing the worst in Israeli society, the most militant, the most Zionist, the most racist of the Israeli political elites came together to isolate Arab parties and to come up with this new sinister agenda regarding Palestine. In some strange way, I think if it were not for the coronavirus, I think Israel would have went to war against Gaza immediately, because if there was anything that Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu had in common throughout this whole year plus of campaigning, is that they were keen on attacking Gaza. Gantz wanted to teach Gaza a lesson. Strangely enough, he was calling Netanyahu weak for not cracking down harder on Gaza, not going to even a more destructive war than the previous one and the previous one and the previous one and so forth. Regarding the coronavirus, Gaza is still struggling with very little supplies being allowed in. An Israeli minister, strangely enough, Minister of Justice, made it clear that coronavirus kits, testing kits and such will not be allowed to Gaza without political concessions from the Palestinian authorities in the Strip. Now, if this happened anywhere else in the world, it would definitely be a political crisis. Some people would be forced to answer some serious questions. It will be headline news everywhere, that you have a nation that is under this perpetual siege, still reeling from the effect of several destructive wars, where you have hospitals that are running out of equipment, and a region that virtually has no electricity, no clean water, and for a leader of a supposedly democratic country to come and make that sort of exchange. But that's where the optimism of the will comes in. When I talk to family in Gaza, when I see photos coming from friends in Gaza, there is a lovely photographer, Fawzi Muhammad, has been sending us at the Palestine Chronicle so many beautiful photos that shows that despite of all of this, somehow people are in you know, just living their everyday life despite of the abnormality and the pain and the hurt and the loss and the tragedy of it all. Pictures of a father who is a performer, dressed up like a clown, entertaining his children. A family of karate instructors bringing their children together with the entire neighborhood, watching from the rooftops of nearby buildings, and they are carrying on with their karate performance. Charity carries on unabated, coronavirus or not. People find ways to contribute and to help one another. And in my opinion, this is what makes Gaza, what makes all of Palestine, in fact, so unique. And this is the real reason of why, after all of these years and all of these wars, Israel still cannot break the will of the Palestinians. Unfortunately, I can't hear you, Hannah.
Can you hear me now, Ramzi?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate it. So we can move in. I would like to bring in another members of Dunya Productions, Manal Al-Sharif, to facilitate the questions that you have been asking our audience. So welcome, Manal. Take it on, please.
Thank you, Hannah. Just once again, the reminder, there's a chat button up on the bottom middle of your screen. If you want to send us any questions, they will just come directly to us and we can ask Ramzi to share his opinion.
Absolutely. So there is a question. Do you know if there is the same argument in Gaza about quarantine versus reopening stores? Meaning, are they debating in Gaza whether they should open stores or not? I'm not certain what is the meaning of the question. Yes, of course, there is the issue of, I mean, we know that unemployment in Gaza is 50%. That is according to the World Bank. Unemployment among the youth is 70%. So you have this situation where you have this kind of several layers of quarantine and siege. Because the situation in Gaza was very grim to begin with. People were unemployed before unemployment became a global issue. And now on top of this, there is the issue of the fact that the few who have been employed, many of them are now unable to make living, especially those who are running small businesses and stores and such. And as one of the texts that was read by your lovely artists before and performance, it talks about how and I've witnessed that in Gaza in my last visit, where you have this army of children who do not go to school, they are walking around Gaza barefoot, is selling cigarettes and newspapers and candies and offering to wipe, windshield wipers and that sort of thing. And sadly, a lot of these families are actually dependent on the income coming from these children. And many of them now cannot do so. And even if they brave going to the street, they can't find customers anymore. So of course there is a very major issue. And I think for some people, they would rather to take the risk with the coronavirus than to actually stop making living altogether.
Thank you, Ramzi. We have another question here. Can you speak about how the siege has impacted the medical system?
Right. So again, this is a situation that is already terrible, and now it's a lot worse. In one of the articles that were cited, it's research we've done about how the quality of water in Gaza has affected hospitals. I mean, this is just not to say anything about everything else, about the electricity, the lack of equipment, the machines that are broken and they have not been prepared, doctors who are not able to acquire, and to further the research and acquire better education, that sort of thing. And now you have the issue even of water itself. 97% of it is not clean, so that to the point that the doctors and the nurses cannot fully prepare for surgery and for the work that they do. And now on top of this, you have the coronavirus. I know that there have been a lot of initiatives from fantastic people all over the world, especially coming from France and England, who are trying to get there, trying to provide help and machinery and equipments and that sort of thing. And sadly, they have been blocked. They are either blocked by the Israelis or blocked by the Egyptians, who are using this as an opportunity to acquire political capital and concession from the Palestinians. So the situation is absolutely terrible as far as the medical healthcare system is concerned. And just a very quick thing. I had this a good friend of mine, he's one top surgeon in France, and he went to Gaza and he said, we went to teach Gazan doctors how to be better doctors, how to deal with the situation during the previous war. And he said, we were absolutely shocked to see how incredible these doctors are, how they managed to turn as you know, the very few tools that they have to make miracles in saving lives. So it's not like Gazan doctors and nurses and Palestinian doctors and nurses in general that are not capable of handling this. They are just not allowed, disbarred from having the proper equipments and facilities and even, you know, clean water to carry on with their jobs.
Thank you, Ramzi. Do you know how many cases and how many deaths have happened in Gaza because of the coronavirus?
Well, for a while we were getting some good updates, especially after the two Pakistani or the Palestinian students returned from Pakistan, and you know, at one point we learned that there was you know, the number of cases that existed in Gaza and in the area of Beit Lahem and Beit Sahur in the West Bank in particular. But in the last few weeks, I think there has been a dearth in the number of cases, and I can explain that, or dearth in terms of updates, and I can explain that at least in the case of Gaza. A few weeks ago, Israel has provided Gaza with 200 testing kits. Of course, they ran out of these testing kits in no time, which meant that the many Gazans who were either diagnosed to have coronavirus or they were suspected to have COVID-19, they were quarantined, but they were not able to leave the quarantine. So you have hundreds of people in Gaza who are quarantined, but they can't get out because they haven't yet tested negative because there are no testing kits. So you could have, we're talking here about the possibility that there are numerous cases, whether they are hidden or known, that Gazan authorities cannot deal with simply because there are not the proper testing facilities and testing kits.
Thank you, Ramzi. I have another question here. What ways are political processes moving forward during this pandemic? Annexation, like home demolitions, settlement buildings, fake peace process?
Right. So, of course, there is no peace process. That is something of the past. And I don't think there has been any real intentions of regenerating that so-called peace process in the first place. What is there is an Israeli-American process where the Palestinians are excluded. International law doesn't exist and doesn't factor in this so-called process whatsoever. The process is really an exchange, a political discussion that is happening between the United States, the Donald Trump administration, and Israel with this new government of when do we annex? When do we have the green light to annex over a third of the West Bank and the entirety of the Jordan Valley? When is it not politically inconvenient for us to do so? So I think the question of annexation has already been settled in the minds of the Americans and the minds of the Israelis. The Americans are a little bit contradictory regarding this. Pompeo made it clear a few weeks ago when he said, this is an Israeli matter. You annex whenever you want to annex. And of course, the Palestinians are demonized, excluded, and attacked at every possibility, as if it's the Palestinian leadership, not the Israeli occupation, not the Israeli apartheid, not the American complete disrespect and disregards for international law that pushed us to this point. It is as if the Palestinian leadership and Palestinians in general who are responsible for all of this. So this is where the so-called process is going, and I think it's really the matter of time before annexation becomes a reality.
I have another question for you. Thank you, Ramzi, for that one. Can you share your opinion about the most effective use of our resources during this time, where to put our time, attention, and the financial resources?
Is that in regarding to Palestine or in general?
For Gaza.
For Gaza, of course. So I believe that what Gaza needs at this moment. They need more than the immediate food supplies and that sort of thing, which is absolutely essential. They need the kind of tools that would allow them to survive. We know that the United Nations have already designated that in 2020, Gaza will become uninhabitable. Now we are already in 2020, we are midway there. I was never really expected that the UN is going to come and declare, okay, here we are, Gaza is uninhabitable. It's not gonna happen this way, because if you make that declaration, what does it mean practically? Are you calling for the 2 million people of Gaza to leave Gaza, to venture out to Sinai? What to do exactly? So but we understand that it is, and I made the argument that it has already been uninhabitable many years ago, because you can't possibly cram 2 million people within this, 360 square kilometers and dump all sorts of weapons and white phosphorus and all sorts of illegal, experiment all sorts of illegal weapons on them, starve them, prevent them from moving and leaving and coming back and living an ordinary life, and to claim that Gaza at any point was actually anything but inhabitable. But that said, the biggest crisis in Gaza right now is a crisis within the medical healthcare facilities, within the water supplies and electricity. If any kind of support, any kind of help, any kind of expertise that would allow Gaza to function as far as these three elements are concerned, I think it would be absolutely essential to the survival of Gaza and to the steadfastness of the people in Gaza.
Thank you, Ramzi, again. Do you know, is the border with Egypt open? And if so, are the medical supplies being sent and test kits to Gaza?
Unfortunately, the border with Gaza is, the status quo ante of the border is it's shut down until further notice. This is why every few weeks, every couple of months, it is big news in Palestine, in Gaza, in Palestinian media, where they say the border is going to be open for 2 days or for 3 days. And sometimes it doesn't actually, that doesn't end up happening anyway. It ends up opening maybe for a day and a half, and it's shut down again. So the openness of the border is not a permanent state. I know of very little that actually gets through that border, through Egypt or to Gaza. I think the best way of actually trying to arrange any sort of support to Gaza happens through UNRWA and through other international institutions, through other embassies that coordinate with Cairo in advance, or with Israel in advance, where supplies can arrive either through the Rafah border or through the Eretz checkpoint.
Thank you, Ramzi. I think that's all the questions that we have.
Okay, thank you, Manal. I think we can wrap it up now. Thank you, Ramzi. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thank you, performers, all the actors and readers. We hope you will look us up, Dunya Productions, on Facebook and on our website. We already have decided and chosen 2 full-scale productions, though the timeline is uncertain right now. Nubian Stories is the first one by Nabra Nilsson, one of our readers that you just watched. And the second show would be The Return by Hanna Eidi, myself, and Edward Mast. And at this time, I would like to introduce Nabra to give us maybe a brief description of Nubian Stories. Nabra, تفضلي.
Thank you, Hannah. And thank you, Ramzi, so much for that discussion. Nubian Stories is a one-woman show that was written by me and my mom, Mona Sharif Nelson, who it's a mix of ancient Nubian folklore tales that my mom grew up with in the village of Abu Simbel in the south of Egypt. And my mom's true life story from her childhood in the old village to the displacement of her people by the intentional flooding of her village and most of Egyptian Nubia by the construction of the Aswan High Dam, to her travels around the world and her very controversial romance with my father, who is an American man. So it's a story about loss and legacy and the importance of storytelling. Our intention is to build towards a living room production run. So we would be bringing this to your living rooms, and you'd be going into people's living rooms and hearing a very intimate story that's meant to be told in that very intimate setting to a small group of people while you're eating and chatting and meeting your community. So when we're able to be back in community, it'll be a lovely way to bring people really close back into community and storytelling.
Thank you, Nabra. Okay, so that's basically our program for today. Once again, I would like to, if you care, to donate to a small scale, all volunteer, immediate food and supplies to people in Gaza and the West Bank. We have set up a donation link, and look for our upcoming Dunya Productions. And thank you again for joining us today, and goodbye.